From the Subaru of Gwinnett studio, this is Injury Insider with Derek Hayes. Injured in Georgia? Make the right call to the law office of Derek M. Hayes at 404-777-HURT. Injury Insider is presented by Status Home Design, your one-stop shop for all your home and gift needs.
Hello and welcome to Injury Insider with Derek Hayes on Business RadioX. We are broadcasting live from the Subaru of the Gwinnett studio in the Sonesta Gwinnett Place Atlanta Hotel. This show will answer legal questions and debunk personal injury myths with insight and expertise. For nearly 25 years, Derek Hayes has exclusively represented injured parties in Georgia. Now he'd like to put that knowledge to work for you. My name is Lita Brooks, and it's my pleasure to introduce the star of the show, Derek Hayes. Good afternoon, Derek.
Good afternoon. I like the star of the show. I need a parking space in the front of the building that says star of the show.
No, you're not getting that. I'm changing that. I'm changing my intro for the next show.
I like that.
I'm just kidding. All right. Wait, before we begin, a quick reminder that Injury Insider is brought to you by Status Home Design, your one-stop shop for all your home and gift needs, and the new Status Market and Design, your online marketplace for all things for your home. Also brought to you by the law office of Derek M. Hayes. Injured in Georgia? Make the right call to the law office of Derek M. Hayes at 404-777-HURT. Welcome back to the studio.
Well, welcome back. It's great to be here again.
We took a little pause on the Injury Insider. We needed to.
Yes, we did.
Because you are a very busy man.
Yeah, it was kind of out of necessity. Work's picked up tremendously. I know the pandemic is still affecting the court system, and the courts have been closed for quite some time, and it's starting to open back up. And doing what I do with personal injury work, the cases are not expected to go back to trial to potentially January or February of 2022.
Wow.
So the courtrooms are not completely opened yet, at least not for what we do. They're still doing some criminal cases, Class A felonies, the more severe felonies, those kind of things are going to trial, but not much of anything else. The courts were completely shut down for 122 days. And so basically our state Supreme Court here in Georgia has added 122 days to the statute of limitations on all cases. So if your case was expected to expire, the statute pass, say on January 1, then you've had 122 days added to that. So it extends the time between being able to settle the case or having to file suit
Sure.
to protect your client's rights.
Seems necessary.
Yeah,
it
is, because when the courts closed, there was not much at all we could do. I mean, very little could be done. So they had to make some sort of concession and figure out a way to account for the fact that nobody was able to work.
So clarify this. They're still closed, or there's just such a backlog?
Well, they're still closed as far as trials for what I do. Courts are slowly opening back up, and virtually every other week or so you'll get a memo about something new they're doing. Like hearings have not started yet in personal injury trials. That's likely going to pick up sometime soon. They may do the hearings by Zoom. We're already doing depositions by Zoom. We're doing mediations by Zoom. So there may eventually be some hearings. They could very well have started, but I have yet personally to have one scheduled. Everybody is going to be on a hearing calendar at some point. It's just if they have started, I have not received notice of any Zoom hearing yet.
Sure. I was just clarifying because we are here in the state of Georgia, and I was under the impression that our governor had lifted much of the mandates. So I thought that would have opened the courts back up.
There are mandates regarding mask and some of the things from that standpoint, even social distancing. But the real dilemma is a jury assembly room on a Monday morning, a week of jury duty, could have anywhere from 500 to 600 people in a room that is standing room only. And that's in most metro Atlanta counties. So you're sitting elbow to elbow in chairs, and then those that don't have a chair are lining the walls, again, elbow to elbow with no room between. So there's no real way to socially distance the 6 feet they tell you. If you do go in for jury selection, you're going to be sitting in the benches in the courtroom. And again, you're going to be sitting right next to everybody. So there's no way to socially distance. If you get picked for a jury, you're sitting in a jury box with 12 chairs. If you go to deliberate, you're in a conference room with a conference room table with 12 chairs and one bathroom. So they've had to figure out ways to effectively open the courts back up, and they're doing trials now in some auditorium-sized rooms at the courthouse here in Gwinnett County, where we are.
That was kind of what was coming to mind as you were saying that. They should just use the entire courtroom instead of just a jury box. Don't let spectators in, or just let the jury have the entire courtroom.
Yeah, and as I said, they're using auditoriums. There's one specific room at the Gwinnett County Courthouse that's used for county commission meetings, school board meetings. It's like you would picture an auditorium in a high school. And they're actually having trials now in those because of the fact there needs to be the space to be able to have the jurors sit and socially distance, and you're wearing masks. And I've not had to go for a trial yet, again, because personal injury is not started. But my understanding is, even as attorneys, depending on the judge, you may have to wear your mask during your opening statement, during your closing argument.
That would be tough. I struggle with the mask personally.
Well, yeah. And being an attorney, you have to be a very effective communicator. And that's body language, that's voice inflection, that's the word usage, all those things that are essential to communicate on behalf of your client. And sometimes when you have to wear a mask, you can't do those same things.
Oh, goodness. Well, we did take a pause, and we talked about that, but did you enjoy your break?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
I know you're here.
Yes.
You're the injury insider. We're going to jump right into the meat and potatoes, but these are your listeners.
Right,
We
right.
can talk about you for a minute.
And work has been tremendously busy, which is a blessing. It's good. I love doing what I do, and that's kind of why I do personal injury work. There are litigation demands that are starting to kick back in. Depositions, I mentioned that. Discovery, which is where you exchange written questions back and forth between both sides. And Zoom work. We're doing the Zoom mediations. I've got one coming up in a couple of weeks on a nursing home case. I've got Zoom depositions next week. So all that is now starting to pick up, which there was a need to take a brief pause to kind of get reset for this tidal wave, is kind of what we're referring to it as. A tidal wave of litigation now, with courts getting close to opening back up completely.
I've seen, on a personal note, obviously you and I are together, I've seen you work basically round the clock. I mean, you'll come home just long enough to eat, and then you're back at work till Sunday night?
Well,
it was
not
2 in the
physically.
morning. No, right, but in files and reading.
Yeah,
and,
sitting
and
at the table
doing,
at home
all
and
the,
doing that.
You'll just keep saying there's just so much. There's just so much.
Yeah, and again, it's a good thing. And
absolutely.
There was a pause, and I'm going to talk a little more about this in the show in a little bit, but there was a pause even in insurance companies in handling claims and settling claims. And some of that's starting to pick back up again, which is great. It's terrific, especially for our clients. But it does mean that it's been a backlog of work where nothing was happening. Even as hard as we as attorneys would try to push things along, there's still roadblocks with COVID. And now, thankfully, some of those roadblocks are being lifted. Now, there are other states that are completely shut down still, that are not seeing any progress, even in, there are some criminal trials they have to have, because under our Constitution, you're entitled to a speedy trial if you're accused of a crime. But there are very few things that are happening in many other states at all.
All right. Even though we paused this show, The Injury Insider, for a short period of time, and our listeners may not know that. Again, when podcasts live forever, so if they're listening to these in any kind of succession, they may say, "Well, that I don't know what they're meaning," and that's okay, right?
Right.
We put these out there and put these on all the social media platforms. We just personally had to take a pause again because of the workload that Derek was explaining. But I understand that your website and Facebook page have still been very active from the prior shows. Talk about that.
Yes, you mentioned the podcast still living forever out there. It's crazy. The numbers are still going up from listeners, and you can see that even though have not for a couple of months now been recording new episodes, the numbers of those that have been out there for some time are still going up. So yes, people are still downloading the podcast, listening to prior episodes. If you have an issue with your insurance and you're trying to decide what coverages to get, well, go back to listen to the podcast about insurance coverage and the definitions of things from liability to UIM, and you'll learn. And I'm sure a lot of folks have, because I've heard from them that, I had a question about the slip and fall claims, and I went back and listened, and now I understand a lot better. But I've had comments that have come to me through my website, through my Facebook page about the podcast. Also, too, I've had suggestions from a lot of people about new topics to discuss that we haven't covered.
That's
some,
cool.
Some of those have actually come from attorneys, which is really interesting. Yeah. So when an attorney is referencing their own case that they've got and would like for me to talk a little bit about an issue, you're thinking, wait, am I doing this so they can figure out what they need to do next? Or is there just truly an interest in that topic? But I also have clients and even listeners that have submitted ideas, which are terrific ideas for new shows. And I've also talked to a couple of folks about coming as guests for some new shows. And I'm not going to go too far into that now, but really good guests that can add a tremendous amount of information to what we've talked about.
Well, I know you very well, and I bet you have a lot to talk about today. Where do you want to start? What's today's show?
Yes, I do. And I mentioned it just a minute ago, all the comments from listeners. And one listener in particular, that the question they posed really kind of led me down a path to say, well, I need to do an entire show about that.
Okay.
And so it inspired me to dedicate this show to that, about car insurance in general, things about how rates have almost doubled during the pandemic in some areas, and really car insurance rates in general. The question itself is very simple, but the answer isn't. The question is, why is Georgia car insurance so expensive? Now, I'm going to take the word Georgia out of that, and I'm going to plug in virtually every other state, because
How
nationally...
about just take it out? Why is car insurance so expensive?
I do want to answer their question specifically about Georgia, but understand that the majority of the things I'm going to say, it's not limited to Georgia. So you could plug in any other state, Texas, California, Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, any state you want to, you can plug in there. But I do want to address their question about Georgia first. So to start about Georgia and why insurance rates are so expensive, it's expensive because this state has some of the most accident-prone highways in the entire country. Georgia does.
Wow.
Not only that.
Wow.
Yeah. Next, and this is really one of the ones that kind of goes hand in hand with that, Georgia law, the law here in Georgia prevents our insurance companies, or gives them basically the right, I kind of got sidetracked, it gives insurance companies the right to raise premiums without the prior approval of the insurance commissioner's office. In other states, besides Georgia, they have to go to the insurance commissioner's office and justify the increase in rates. We've had natural disasters. We've paid out X number of billions of dollars in claims. It's essential now for us to raise rates to maintain our ability to work as a company, not go bankrupt. They have to justify it. In Georgia, they don't have to. Our insurance commissioner does not have the final say-so as to whether or not rates will go up. So they can basically raise them arbitrarily. So naturally, that's kind of what happens. Rates can skyrocket at any time, really, for no justification at all. Now, after the fact, when rates go up, you'll see a news reporter from one of the local channels go and talk to the insurance commissioner, and our current insurance commissioner or any other one would say, well, we're looking into that. We're going to find out more. But the reality is they don't have the right to regulate it here in Georgia. So it's true in other states, not many, but that is Georgia specific.
I didn't realize that part about not regulating the insurance companies. That's new information for me. But I completely agree that people in Georgia do not know how to drive.
No,
I was
don't.
really,
No,
when you
don't.
said that, I was like, oh my God, yes, that makes perfect sense to me because I live here in Georgia and I see it. I have to take an interstate to work and I see a wreck almost every day. Does that entity keep track, does any entity keep track of how many fatality wrecks occur each year?
Yes. Fatality wrecks, it can't get worse than that. That's the reality of it. When somebody's lost their life, that is the most tragic car wreck claim that you can have. And yes, there are statistics that kind of bear that out as far as the states are concerned. So the top 5 states with the most fatal car wrecks are, number 1, Texas. And this is based on 2020. In 2020, Texas had 3,305 fatalities in car wrecks.
That's a lot.
3,300. Next is California, not far behind at 3,259 fatal car wrecks or fatalities in car wrecks. Mm-hmm. Florida was third with 2,915. And then it's Georgia, number 4. Number 4 overall with 1,407 fatal car wrecks.
That's half from Florida.
Yes.
That's 1,500 less.
But it's
than
also
the next
number
one.
4 overall.
Right.
Number 5 overall is North Carolina with 1,321. Now, let's talk about another statistic real quick about that. So if you look in population, states, based on their population, naturally Texas, California, Florida, you would picture 1, 2, and 3 in some order as population. So the real order is California is the most populated state in our country. Second is Texas. So California is number 2 in fatal car wrecks. Texas is number 1. Florida is the third most populated state in the U.S., so it's number 3 on the list of fatal car wrecks. But Georgia is number 9 in population, but yet it's number 4 overall in fatal car wrecks.
Well, what is it with the roads here?
Well, we'll go back to what we said earlier. Unfortunately, Georgia drivers, many of them don't know how to drive. And they're very accident-prone highways here. Lots and lots of people travel through Georgia. And finally, North Carolina is number 10 overall in population. So the number 9 and 10 states in population order are number 4 and 5 in fatal car wrecks. But also think about this for a minute. If you're up north and you're wanting to go to Florida, you drive through North Carolina, you drive through Georgia.
Yep. If you're coming from New York, New Jersey, right, you're going through North Carolina.
And the number 1 roadway in Georgia, number 1 is I'll tell you number 1 and number 2 for fatal car wrecks. Number 1 is I-20, which is
That's
an interstate,
east to west.
right? Which is east to west. So you think about that for a second. You know, it almost contradicts what the other statistics was.
Right.
But then I-75 is the second roadway with the most fatalities here in Georgia. So going east to west, that roadway, I-20, has the most fatal car wrecks every year. I-75 that goes north to south has the second most fatal car
I wonder
wrecks.
if it's because I-20 isn't as heavily traveled. There's not as much traffic on I-20 in a lot of places. I mean, I've taken I-20 and gone towards Augusta. It's wide open.
Yeah.
And maybe people just treat it like an Autobahn and they just
That's
fly.
it. Yeah, no, that
because
could
it
be,
is,
right.
you know, it's opposite of I-85 or some of these other big roadways in Atlanta.
And another argument could be, too, there are more exits off of I-20 and shorter spans of distance between those exits. And merge lanes are the number 1 lane where car wrecks occur.
I always want to know why. Why is that? Why is that?
Well, because
We're gonna
there are
figure it
2
out.
reasons.
Yeah.
One, people that are in the first lane of traffic don't move to their left as other people are merging. And people that are merging sometimes don't accelerate to a proper speed to be able to merge, and they'll move in front of a car going slower than that car may be, and that causes a collision. Or they may go too fast and wind up rearing the car themselves as they try to merge on the lane or not even look and make sure the lane's clear. Now, in 2020, you know, I mentioned before, Georgia had a total of 1,407 fatal car wrecks. That means a car wreck with a fatality. But the actual number of fatalities was 1,615 people in 2020. That is the second most since 2007. In 2007, we had 16,041. So, you know, even though the roads are less traveled during COVID, that's the second highest fatality number we've had since 2007. And I go back to what you just said. The Department of Highway Safety here in Georgia is working under the assumption that people feel like speed, because of the roads being less populated, they can go faster. And speed, you've probably heard the phrase, speed kills.
Sure.
People lose control. People fly up behind another car not realizing how slow they're going, or someone changes lanes in front of a car not realizing it's going 100 miles per hour as opposed to the posted 70 miles per hour. And those are the kind of things that lead to more fatality wrecks. You know, in 2019, we only had 1,491 fatalities. In 2018, we had 994.
Wow.
So it's gone up. You know, almost doubled, not quite, but almost doubled between 2018 number to the 2020 number.
With less people on the road.
With less people on the road.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's an interesting statistic.
You know, and add into that people working from home.
Well, that is awful. Is there a statistic that shows how many accidents happen a day in the U.S.?
Yeah, there is, and this isn't just fatal wrecks. This is any wreck in general. So the current statistic from February of 2021 shows that there's an average of 16,438 car wrecks a day in the U.S.
Wow.
16,438 car wrecks a day.
Wow.
Now, that's only the reported car wrecks. Think about the number of bumper scuffs and bumper taps and car wrecks that occur in parking lots at malls, grocery stores, any number of things. Or, somebody has a car wreck, they rear end somebody, and the guy they rear-ended has a warrant for their arrest. The last thing they want to do is call the police, so everybody takes off in a different direction, and nobody ever knows about that car wreck. So 16,438 car wrecks a day.
Okay, well, Mr. Statistics, tell me what city has the most car crashes?
I'm glad you asked that.
I know you're going to have it.
Yeah, this is crazy. I would have thought, when you go back and talk about the states with the most car wrecks, Texas, California, and Florida, I was thinking, okay, it's got to be somewhere there.
Can I guess?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so Texas has the most. I'm thinking of a big city in Texas.
Texas has the most fatal car wrecks. The next is California.
Right.
And the next is Florida.
Right. So
you're asking,
why can't
what
I just
city?
take an obvious guess and say Dallas?
Now, this statistic is based on the number of people in the city and the percentage of those people that have had car wrecks.
Okay.
If you look at it that way. So
I
you
was
say Dallas.
taking a very educated guess based on the state that has the most.
Well, again, this is going to be on Jeopardy at some point.
Can I say Atlanta as my second? One or the other,
Yeah.
Dallas or Atlanta?
Or this would be the TV show Who Wants to Be a Millionaire.
Okay.
This could be the $1 million question.
Well, you're going to be my backup.
Because I don't know that
there.
anybody would have this. You
Okay.
can find
All right. So
everything you want to.
based on what you said,
It's
I didn't guess right.
Johns Island, South Carolina.
What?
You never heard of it, right?
No.
I'd never heard of it either. Johns Island, South Carolina. Apparently, 21.6% of drivers that live in Johns Island have had an at-fault accident on their
That's
record.
not something to laugh about, but what are these people doing?
I don't know. I don't know.
21.6%?
Of people that
Have-
live there have had an at-fault where they caused an at-fault
Wow.
wreck. And the population there is only 21,500 people.
Okay.
Think about that.
I'm going to look this up
So
later.
stay off the roads in St.
Wow.
John's, or not St. John's, in Johns Island, South Carolina. Stay off the roads. If you have a family member or a friend or someone that lives in Johns Island, don't go visit them.
Or beef up their insurance.
Ask them to come visit you. Never
Make
drive
sure
there.
you got the best coverage for them.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, let's talk about the pandemic effects on car insurance. Speaking of car insurance, what is happening with personal injury claims now that is different from before March of 2020?
I'm going to talk about in general terms first, then I'm going to talk about some lawsuits that are going on currently. So with insurance companies, the desire to settle cases has kind of waned, a good way to put it, in the sense that the insurance company knows full well that courts are closed. So as an attorney, if an insurance company does not pay a fair value on a claim or offer a fair value, the reasonable value of the claim, naturally you file suit. You have two choices. You can settle it for far less money than the case is worth, or you can file suit. I always encourage clients, if they're not paying the full value of your claim, we're filing suit. In the past, when you filed suit, then the courts were opened. You didn't have to worry about the pandemic. You didn't have to worry about delays. You didn't have to worry about the length of time that it was going to take to eventually get to a trial. With the courts being closed for a total of 122 days now in Georgia, it used to take on average about 2 years. On average, statewide, about 2 years between filing suit and going to trial. Now, we can only assume that the 122 days that the courts were closed down and personal injury trials have still not started back up and may not even start till January or February of next year, you can potentially add another either year to 2 years on top of that 2-year window. So until the courts kind of clean this logjam, it could be 3 or 4 years before cases eventually go to trial, just languishing in litigation with nothing happening. Something's going to happen to clean that logjam up. Adding new judges, some sort of modification to how trials are going to be conducted, court-ordered mediations, or some way to clean the dockets so cases can pick back up again. So in Georgia, we've seen that delay. We've seen that stall. We've seen insurance companies sit on money and earn interest on money that's sitting in their bank account drawing interest as opposed to paying a claim. If you have someone who's unfortunately killed in a car wreck and there's, say, $100,000 in liability coverage, the insurance company can look at that one of two ways. We can do the right thing, and we can go ahead and tender and pay our full $100,000 for this grieving family that's lost mom or dad or their child. Or we can sit back, keep that $100,000 in our bank account, draw interest on it for another 3-4 years, maybe even longer, and then pay it before it goes to trial.
That's heartbreaking for the families.
Oh, and absolutely it is.
So what if you used a fatality as an example, but let's just say it was me and I get in a car accident and I'm out of work because that car accident really messed up my back or broke my leg, and they won't pay.
And throw in that you've had surgery of that leg.
Right. I've got all these medical bills. I've been out of work. Right. And so I pursue a claim, even just to tender limits on my own policy.
Yeah. And don't think that hospital is going to wait for you to get that money to start knocking on your door and going, hey, you got this bill out here. Where's the money?
Yeah, medical bills
can turn
it
over to a
very
collections
intimidating.
company and affecting your credit score and all those things that can happen if the bill sits out there unpaid for an extended period of time. So, unfortunately, times are very difficult, and some people are likely forced into settling for a number that normally would not be an appropriate number for their case just because they can't wait. And insurance companies can prey on that misfortune and basically use it against someone to satisfy a claim for far less than what the real value would be or should be. But I referenced lawsuits. There have been lawsuits filed about insurance rates because I don't want to get too far off topic.
Okay.
This was a question about rates. Insurance companies during the pandemic, initially they talked about, well, we're going to refund some money. We're going to cut our prices. In fact, discounts varied from $50 to $100, which was a one-time refund that a company called Acuity gave to their insureds. There was a 25% reduction in bills from March until May with State Farm, a 15% credit that Geico gave to their customers. So different companies had different ways of, we're going to give you a kickback, less cars on the road. You're not driving to work. You're working from home. So we'll give you some of this money back and save you money on your premiums. But in reality, as soon as that window of time was over or that very limited discount was over, well, they went back to where the rates would normally be. In some cases, they increased them above what they had been prior to the pandemic. So some states have now had class action lawsuits filed. In fact, in Nevada, they filed suit against 10 of the major auto insurance companies just, I think, Tuesday of last week or maybe the week before, contending that the companies were charging excessive insurance premiums during the pandemic. In fact, the specific companies were State Farm, USAA, Geico, Acuity, Liberty Mutual, Farmers, Progressive, Travelers, Nationwide, and Allstate. I refer to those as the big boys.
Right.
Those are the big players in the insurance industry. Right.
Sure.
And virtually every one of them, there's not many that aren't on that list that would fall into that big hitter category. They're all being sued, 10 of them, in a class action lawsuit for raising their rates during the pandemic. Again, we go back to Georgia not regulating what insurance companies do. So clearly Georgia's not on the list of states that are filing suit. Mm-hmm. But other states have done the same thing. They filed lawsuits in New York. I believe Michigan is one of those states. So many states have now stepped in on behalf of their citizens to try and regulate and control what insurance companies have done. And if you look at the profits for insurance companies during the pandemic, there's been a record turn on the profits. So you can't, out of one side of your mouth, say, well, we're going to give you discounts, we're going to give you kickbacks. There are less cars on the road, less likelihood of a car wreck. And then out of the other side of your mouth, say, well, we're going to raise your rates too, as soon as this little period of a discount's done.
Okay. I remember when I got my insurance, and it's just a coincidence that my ex-husband is my insurance agent, and he based my rates on my credit score. I had never heard of that before. I thought it was in more age and where I lived. Sometimes it's very zip code, but he said it was on my credit score.
Yeah, and that's one of the crazy things about insurance companies and determining rates. So it's all about risk. The higher your risk is as a driver, the higher your rates typically be. I use the example of a 16-year-old male driver in a convertible, souped-up sports car. Doesn't matter what it is. And then you put a 40 or 45-year-old man or woman in a minivan who's never had a ticket, never had a car wreck, never had any claim whatsoever on their history, and you go to insure that middle-aged person on their minivan compared to that 16-year-old boy, and boys' rates are always higher than girls, in that convertible sports car, I guarantee you the rates for that kid are going to be 3 times what the rates would be for that middle-aged mom or dad that's not had a car wreck. But credit is one of the factors they look to as far as risk is concerned. In their mind, again, talking about insurance companies, they feel as though credit can predict the likelihood that you'll have a claim, meaning that if you have bad credit, well, you're going to be more likely than not to present a claim against your insurance company. So some states have actually banned that practice. It is illegal in California, Hawaii, Massachusetts, and Michigan to determine your rates based on your credit history.
Oh, okay.
Which is great. I think it should be everywhere. I mean, think about this. If you are a person who's worked, for 10 years of your life, you're in your mid-30s maybe, and you, unfortunately, you lose your job because of some other injury, or your company's downsized and your company goes bankrupt that you work for, and your spouse is out of work. He or she's same thing. They've had something going on with their work, and you fall on hard times. We all, through the course of our lives, are going to have some period of time that's difficult, and so as a result of that, a couple of bills get behind. Your credit score gets affected, and your insurance company just so happens it's time to renew your policy, and they see this negative mark on your credit score and use that as a justification for potentially doubling your rates. That's ridiculous.
Yeah. No,
it is.
absolutely.
It's sad that they do it, but they can.
So in a prior podcast, you talked and you went into detail about all the different types of coverage, but I know you've got some you want to touch on today, correct?
Yeah, I want to talk about how your rates can be affected based on the kinds of coverage you pick and the limits that you pick. So as an example, minimum coverage here in Georgia, and I keep using Georgia because that's where we are, minimum coverage here is $25,000 per person, $50,000 per occurrence. Every state has its own minimum. Most states are $2,550, some are $5,100, some are less than that. $10,000 per person, $20,000 per occurrence. Some states are no-fault states, and I'm not going to get into that. But anyway, so your coverage selection. If I go to an insurance agent and I only want to purchase minimum coverage, that's it. I want liability of $25,000 per person, $50,000 per occurrence, and nothing more. I'm going to see a minimal rate. On the other hand, if I bump that up to $50,000 per person, $100,000 per occurrence, or $100,000, $300,000, or $250,000, $500,000, and I add collision, and I add comprehensive, and I add uninsured and underinsured and towing and those kinds of things, well, obviously your rates are going to go up. However, there are parts of that that are essential, and I say this all the time. I strongly encourage people to at least have UM, uninsured motorist, which comes hand in hand with UIM, which is underinsured motorist. Statistically, there are 12.7%, I think it is, of Georgia drivers, again, Georgia, that have no insurance at all. So with that being said, if you have no UM coverage and you get hit by one of those uninsured drivers, you have no recourse for your claim except for going after that person. And someone who doesn't insure their car, there's a pretty good chance they're not going to have any assets to pay any kind of verdict against them anyway.
Yeah.
So your coverage selection.
I know. I'm just sitting here nodding my head like, yes, it's all very valuable information. It makes me want to go look at my policy. All right. But I know your deductible, it also factors into this.
Yeah, that's a good point too. So deductibles, you can pick your deductible. Obviously, the lower your deductible is, generally the higher the rate is. The higher the deductible, the lower the rate. So if I have a $250 deductible, well, I'm going to see a certain amount for and my premiums for that deductible. If I bump that deductible up to $1,000, my rates are going to be a little bit lower because if an incident occurs, I'm going to be paying $1,000, the first $1,000 out of my pocket. So say, for example, it's a collision claim. And we've talked about collision before. Collision is if your car is parked on the roadway overnight, nobody's in the car, you're in bed asleep, and you wake up the next morning and somebody hit your car and left. And you've got severe damage, or you're in a parking lot, somebody hits it. That's a collision claim. So if your collision deductible is $250, well, your rate for that part of your policy is going to be a little bit higher. If you have your deductible raised to $1,000, and let's say it's $900 of damage done to your car, well, the insurance company's not going to pay a penny of that. because it's below your deductible. Whereas if your deductible is $250, you're only going to write a check for $250. They're going to pick up the balance to pay that full $900.
Well, here's another question. What about car insurance history? What if I'm the best driver ever? I've never had a ticket or a wreck. Should that play into it?
Yes, it can, but they're also, and I'm not talking necessarily completely about that. When you talk about coverage history or car insurance history, I want to talk more about the first time ever buying insurance. If I am 16 years old and I've got my license and I am personally purchasing my own insurance, I'm going to see an extremely high rate, like I talked about.
Sure.
I'm a
well,
young
that
kid.
makes perfect. Well,
but
I
if
guess
I'm
we just
out
hear
of
about
college, I'm 22, 23 years old, 24 years old. Mom and dad are not going to insure me anymore. I've got to go get my own policy. I've never had a car insurance history where I've paid premiums. Then my rate's going to be a little bit higher because I'm considered to be a little bit greater risk. Or if I'm later in age, I'm in my 40s, I've never driven before. And for some reason, I decided, yeah, I'm going to finally get my car license and buy a car and I driver's license and I get a car. I'm going to see high rates because I have no history of driving. Another issue is coverage gaps. If I had car insurance and for some reason financially I stopped paying it and my insurance canceled, and by the grace of God, I thankfully never had a wreck or never had a claim, and I went for 6 months with no insurance at all, and then I go to pick insurance back up again, they're going to see that I went a window of time without any insurance. And that's going to affect the amount of money I'm going to have to pay in my rates because, again, I'm a risk at that point.
Well, okay. No, I get it. I was just going to ask a question, but I don't know if it's super relevant. So here's an example. Let's say I'm, me over here, Lita, I have my own car, have my own insurance, and then I meet you. We buy a car. Now you're insuring it.
Sure.
Okay.
But they'll look at my history as an insurance policy
Right, but then I go
holder.
back. Now, right, let's say we have a car together, but it's on your policy. So
Okay.
I'm not on it, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So now I go back and I say, no, I need a minivan because I got a gazillion kids over here. I'm going to put it in my name. So I go back to having my own insurance.
Mm-hmm.
So I just had a big gap.
No, that's not the gap I'm talking about. The gap
Okay.
I'm talking about is if your insurance canceled.
Okay.
I have a car. I'm in my 20s and I'm struggling financially. COVID made my job, lay me
Okay.
off. I'm not had an income and I got to figure out somehow, some way to make my monthly expenses. Well, if I don't pay my car insurance, I'm taking a risk if I have a car wreck, but man, I can save some money and I can put that money into food. And so I go 3, 4, 5, 6 months with no car insurance at all. And again, by the grace of God, thankfully I have no car wreck. But finally I get some money back in and I'm thinking, man, I got to go back and put insurance on my car again. When they see that I've gone for a period of time not insuring my car and I continued to drive, that's what puts me in that risk
That's the gap,
category.
the coverage gap.
That's the
okay.
gap
Well,
I'm
I
talking
hope
about.
that clarified because I was hearing you and I
Yeah.
thought I was fully understanding what you were saying, and then clearly I wasn't. So.
Right. Or if you just stop paying,
Right. Okay.
then you're looked at as a risk, an extreme risk.
Gotcha. Coverage gap. All right. Are there any other factors that can affect your car insurance rates that we have not covered?
Yeah, and I want to kind of wrap this up because there's so many other things we could talk about. But in just general headings, think about your driving record. If you've had tickets for speeding, if you've had a ticket for running a red light, any number of things, well, that usually stays with you for about 3 to 5 years, and that is going to be on your driving record. That will also affect your rate.
I would have thought longer.
Usually about 3 to 5 years. That's
Okay.
about average. At fault wrecks, not wrecks where you weren't at fault, but wrecks where you were at fault. That's where, again, your risk factors go up. The worst thing would be a DUI, a DWI, where you've been convicted of driving under the influence. That is
Those stay longer.
Those stay longer. Yeah, those generally stay a lot longer. I've heard some say 7 years.
That's
I've
what
heard
I
some say
haven't
10
had one, but I
years.
have heard that it was 7.
But I'm talking about a ticket. When I say 3 to 5
Sure.
years, I'm talking about speeding or running a red light, stop sign, those kind of things. But if you are what we refer to as a risky driver, your rates are going to be affected because of your driving history, your prior citations, prior wrecks, the type of car you drive. I kind of mentioned that earlier. If I'm driving a Porsche Boxster or a Lamborghini or a Bugatti, or go as extreme as you want to, and I want to insure my high-end car, I'm going to see a much higher rate than if I'm just in a very small sedan that's very affordable, low-end car.
A mom minivan.
Okay, a mom minivan.
Something, right?
Yes.
Where you
well, there's
just
a
assume
big
there's a lot of
difference.
relative safety right there.
You don't see many drag races between a mom minivan and a Maserati or something like that.
No, you don't.
All right, age and driving experience.
That's what I was talking about.
Yeah, so
Okay.
the older you are with a clean driving history, you're going to see much, much lower rates. Usually that 22 years of age, some companies it's maybe around 20 years old, you're going to see the fact that you're still considered to be a new driver, but also you're still in that risky driver category. Most speeding tickets are for younger people, newer drivers, or kids that are wanting to race their buddy or are kind of ignoring the law and going 55 instead of 25. So as you age, you'll see your rates go down as long as your driving record stays clean and the number of years you've been able to drive with a clean history. That's going to make your rates a lot lower. And then another one I want to talk about is your zip code.
Yes, I brought that up.
Your zip code.
Didn't I say that earlier?
You
I
may
think
have.
it's, isn't that one of the things? Oh, I said, because he based mine on my credit, and I thought it was more age and zip code.
So zip code, let's talk about that briefly. The zip code, they look at the crime statistics. And if you're in a zip code where car break-ins are slash tires, vandalism, if that's an extremely high crime rate in the area where you live, your zip code, your rates are going to be higher than someone who's not in an area where carjackings, where vandalism, tires being slashed, where car break-ins are very, very low, very minimal. Your rates are not going to be high because it's a less risky zip code than that high risk zip code. Inner cities, you see a very high rate for most people who have cars, especially in areas where they're not on a parking deck or an area where it's, they'll even ask where you live and they'll know whether or not your apartment complex, your condo, your townhouse, your penthouse, if it's a guarded, gated parking lot, you're not going to be necessarily grouped in that person who is in a high crime rate area who has to park in their driveway or on the street. But yeah, your zip code can affect the rate you pay for your car insurance. Other things are if you own a home, you're considered to be more responsible. Again, craziness, but they'll look at those things.
Yeah.
Marital status. Married people tend to be better drivers than non-married people.
That's interesting.
It is.
Yeah.
Statistically, you can bear that out.
Sure.
Education. The higher the education, generally.
I'm just nodding my head. Yes, that makes
generally,
sense. Okay.
Occupation. Certain occupations are higher risk drivers than others. Again, I know it sounds crazy, but these are all borne out in insurance statistics and things they look to in determining your rate. And the final one's gender. I think you already know the answer, but what gender you think typically pays a higher rate? A male. Or a female? Yes.
Yes.
But people always complain about female drivers. Yeah, you've probably heard that phrase before. I personally don't, but you've probably heard
Out of
it.
the two of us, I'm the best driver.
Okay, whatever. But anyway, so yes, your gender is also an effect on what your rate will be.
Well, extremely interesting. I feel like I've learned a ton. I'm literally, and I know this is a podcast, so our listeners can't see me, but I'm just sitting here nodding. Yes, yeah. Oh, it makes perfect sense. So I hope you guys listening got as much out of this as I have. Derek, we're gonna, before we wrap up, I want you to tell all of our listeners, how can they find you? How can they contact you if they have a question or if they need you because they've had a car wreck, they've had a personal injury to themselves and they need some assistance?
Contact me. That's the answer. Contact me any number of ways. We'll start with a website. It's Derek, DEREK, the letter M as in Matthew, Hayes, HAYS. So DerekMHayes.com. That's my website. On the website, you'll see a chat feature. You can chat with me directly there. You'll also see an area where you can submit an email with some basic facts about a potential claim. I'll be the one to respond. I am the one that will call you or respond to your email, reach back out to you if you've sent me the information. There's also a chat feature, too, regarding the podcast where you can submit your question. You could submit a topic that we can potentially talk about in another show later on. But definitely go to the website. You can see everything you need to see there. You can also go to social media. My Facebook page is the Law Office of Derek M. Hayes. I have Twitter, Law Office of Derek M. Hayes, and Instagram, Law Office of Derek M. Hayes. My phone numbers are 404-777-HURT or 678-225-0970. And as always, the initial consultation is completely free. It does not obligate you for anything. I did have a question on a side note. I had someone I spoke to actually just today about a new claim, and one of the questions they asked from the very beginning was, is this confidential? When I speak to you or anything I tell you, is it just between you and me? The answer is yes. When I get those calls at the office, it's completely confidential. Absolutely. So it's a free confidential consultation, and we'll go through the facts of your potential case. And if I can help you, I'll be glad to jump in and get involved for you.
Thank you so much for joining us on Injury Insider with Derek Hayes, presented by Status Home Design and the Law Office of Derek M. Hayes. Don't forget that you can enjoy any of our episodes anytime by visiting businessradiox.com, selecting the Gwinnett Studio, and then clicking Injury Insider with Derek Hayes. This program is also available on your favorite podcast app. Until next time, for Derek Hayes, I'm Lita Brooks, and you've been listening to Injury Insider on Business Radio X.